वो सुबह कभी तो आएगी.
I don't believe that anybody can push India around anymore. It's become too big and too powerful to be pushed around like that.
विश्व में हमारी छवि बनाने का काम व्यापार के माध्यम से हुआ है, व्यापारियों के माध्यम से हुआ है और उसमें बनी हुई ईमानदारी के माध्यम से हुआ है.
इंटरनेशनल रिलेशंस में केवल ट्रेड ही नहीं है, डिप्लोमेटिक रिलेशंस भी नहीं है, बॉर्डर के डिस्प्यूट भी हैं, साइंटिफिक एक्सप्लोरेशंस भी हैं. तो ओवरऑल जो भारत की पॉलिसी है वो बहुत अच्छी नहीं रही है.
हमारे देश की जो एक्सटर्नल अफेयर्स मिनिस्ट्री है वो पुराने धड़धड़े से काम कर रही है. डिप्लोमेसी, इंटेलिजेंस गैदर करना, उनकी स्ट्रेंथ को जानना, उनके दोस्त कौन है उनको जानना, ये घिसी पिटी सालों पुरानी व्यवस्थाएं हैं.
The SAARC is a failure, you know. In India, as a businessman can't go to Pakistan. A Pakistani businessman can't come to here.
ओवरऑल हम देखें इंडिया के नेबर्स के साथ अच्छे संबंध नहीं है और मैं ये मानता हूं कि जब तक नेबर्स के साथ आपके अच्छे संबंध नहीं होंगे तब तक एज एन इम्पॉर्टेंट कंट्री इन द इंटरनेशनल एरिना भारत को अपनी स्थिति को इंटैक्ट बनाए रखने में, इम्पॉर्टेंट पोजीशन को बनाए रखने में काफी समस्याएं आने वाली हैं.
A strong economy is the driver of an effective foreign policy. So, we will have to be strong in economic terms and commercial sense. We have to put our own house in order so that the world gets attracted to us.
अफ्रीका में रिसोर्स बहुत है और इट कुड बी ऑयल हो सकता है, डायमंड्स होता है, कुछ भी हो सकता है. तो वो सब इंडिया को तभी मिलेंगे, उनके साथ रिलेशंस तभी होगा जब हमारा पॉलिसी ठीक होगा.
इंडिया इज कंसीडर्ड ए सॉफ्ट स्टेट. तो जो सॉफ्ट स्टेट वाली इमेज है उसको तोड़ना पड़ेगा.
When it comes to Pakistan, we cannot just do with halting dialogues. We have to have political assertion.
Let us recognize that we are big enough now, we are strong enough, and that we have a place in the world. And we should occupy that place in the world.
Hello and welcome to Change India, an agenda for the next Prime Minister. Today in the 14th and final show of our series, we have 10 policy initiatives that will enable the next Prime Minister to frame a more robust foreign policy which protects and promotes India's interests in the world. These initiatives have been culled from recommendations made by a group of experts, and you can get all the details from our website thinkindia.in.com. Joining us in the studio are four distinguished experts. We have Mr. Lalit Mansingh, former Foreign Secretary and former Ambassador to the United States of America. Mr. Vivek Kachu, former Secretary West in the Foreign Ministry and an Ambassador to Afghanistan. Mr. P.P. Shukla, a former Ambassador to Russia who also served in the Prime Minister's office. And joining us on a satellite link is Commodore C. Uday Bhaskar, one of India's top thinkers on strategic affairs. And with them is our very own Dheeraj Nair, CEO of Network 18's Think India Foundation, who has anchored this project for us. We also have an audience in the studio, among whom are some people who have actively pitched into the debate on Twitter and on our website. To note that we will present our suggestions on foreign policy and 13 other policy areas to the next Prime Minister who takes office in June. So let's get right on with our first 3 points. And the first 3 points really have to do more with the structural apparatus of our foreign policy. We are saying that if you want to be a strong foreign policy player in the world, you've got to have a strong economy and you've got to have a strong military. So we are saying over 5 years, you've got to increase the capital expenditure on defense, which has really fallen. Capital expenditure on defense, which is currently only about 1% of GDP, to about 2.5% of GDP. You must do this. Point two is we have a very, very small foreign service. Only about 930 officers compared to Brazil, which has 1,200, and China, which has 4,000. So we really need more people into our foreign policy core, and we are saying get these people from lateral entry of experts, not so much recruitment at the entry level. And our third point is we've got so many intelligence agencies. For instance, the IB reports to the Home Ministry. We've got RAW and NIA, which reports to the Prime Minister's office. We've got military intelligence, which reports to the Defense Ministry. We've got state intelligence agencies. We've got to get a unified structure in place and make all of them accountable to the National Security Advisor. So these are points 1, 2, and 3. Let me go across to Commodore Uday Bhaskar for his opening reaction.
Raghav, there is no doubt that the various issues that you have identified need the highest and the most urgent attention by the new government that would be formed in June. Let me address the two areas where I have some experience. One is that India's foreign policy will only be as effective as India's comprehensive national power and the determination that India's political leadership is able to bring to bear.
Right.
Now we have a number of foreign policy challenges, but they have to be underpinned by one, what I would call as appropriate military capacity. And here, one of the key challenges, which goes back, I would say, to even the NDA government led by Mr. Vajpayee, to the two tenures of Dr. Manmohan Singh, UPA 1 and UPA 2, is the inability to allocate the appropriate amount of funding for capital expenditure, and that when it is done, to ensure that it is not diverted towards revenue or it is not kept on hold, and you do not allow what I would call as the phased and planned modernization of the armed forces.
Let me get Mr. Lalit Man Singh in here. You've seen our 3 points. Also the points 2 and 3, which have got to do with intelligence and restructuring of the foreign ministry. Your reaction, sir?
I think you have missed out an important element here. Is not how much money you allocate for a certain sector or a ministry. You also need to have the right leadership.
Right.
And I think the next Prime Minister, to be effective, must understand international politics and how it works, must understand the linkage between international relations and domestic economic growth.
Right.
And finally must understand the importance of strengthening the Foreign Office as an instrument of policy. So far as the MEA is concerned, 930 is a bit deceptive. I think the number is around 850. The rest are officer trainees.
So it's even worse than
they're not diplomats.
So it's even worse than
it is much worse.
Okay.
Our size is the same as that of New Zealand or Singapore. This is shameful.
As bad as that?
As bad as that. Shameful for a major global player like India. So we need to expand it, not modestly as you say, to 1,400 officers. We need to think of 3,000 to 5,000 officers as any respectable global player must have.
Right. Right.
Mind you, the US has 20,000.
Right.
So we have a large ground to cover.
That's right. Mr. Kachuk.
We have to increase the numbers in the Foreign Service. But more than that, I think the structure of the Foreign Ministry, the External Affairs Ministry itself needs to undergo change. At the moment, the secretaries who are in charge of their respective areas work in silos. That has to end. And I believe that we've got to set up a formal committee of secretaries, a statutory committee of secretaries, which will be able to give an integrated view to the political leadership.
Mr. Shukla.
3 points are absolutely vital. Firstly, I mean, I'll take it as given that we are targeting a 7% GDP growth. With that, I think one thing I would say is 2.5% of the GDP seems a little low to me.
Only on capex. Only on capital expenditure.
Because yes, I understand that. What I'm saying is that why am I saying that? 2.5% on a long-term basis, say a decade or so, yes. But we have to make up for the last several years.
Yes.
So I think the early requirements will be much higher, number one. Number two, please note our security situation is worsening very rapidly.
Yes.
And we have to be prepared for it literally on a war footing. Because the situation today
just by way of example, we do about $37 billion, while China does $130 billion.
130 this year, exactly.
Real budget is about 200.
200, that's right.
You are not able to spend even 37 billion.
Now, the other thing is the point about leadership. You know, for the last several decades, we have had non-communicative absentee prime ministers and other leaders. That must change. Look at any democracy. A leader addresses the people on a regular basis.
Sure.
And that is, point is, this program that we've got
absolutely, there's no question,
is going to require a hard slog on the part of the people of India.
Yes.
The leader must prepare the people for the hard times that these entail. The last point I want to make is about intelligence. I agree with Vivek. We need a director of national intelligence,
right,
separate from the NSA.
Right.
The two have different roles to play.
Okay.
And we need each
and
of
get
them.
all the agencies
we need
reporting
both
into
these
one.
posts.
Yes. Dheeraj.
Yeah, just to start with intelligence, I think, the idea is to get everyone together. The idea also is not to make the NSA a super foreign minister, which has been the case over the last decade or so. I mean, you need the foreign ministry to do its own job under its minister and leadership. You need the NSA to give a different kind of advisory job. Intelligence can be a part of it. In terms of defense, absolutely. I mean, we are seeing a situation where we have MiG fighter planes falling out of the sky, killing fighter pilots. We have submarines exploding, claimed the Navy chief. I mean, equipment and modernization of the defense is something which is long pending. So I agree, but expenditure is a necessary condition. You can't do it without spending.
That's right.
But
And
you
also foreign investment.
And you need foreign investment. Get foreign investment.
And private investment.
And private investment in, so you don't have to import it all and give problems to your balance of payments.
Right.
So I think there's a lot of structural reform in the system, including expanding the foreign service, which must be done in the first year or two.
We'll take a break at this stage. You go to our website, thinkindia.in.com, give your suggestions, and when we come back, we'll look at Pakistan and China. Stay right there. Welcome back to Change India, an agenda for the next Prime Minister. Today, in the last show of our series, we are looking at India's foreign policy, how to get it more robust and more effective. Points 4 and 5, we've dealt with about points 1, 2 and 3. Points 4 and 5 are on Pakistan. For Pakistan, we are saying, just start acting tough. You've got to revive covert operations ability. We don't seem to have that, or at least it's withered over the last few years. Create economic deterrence. India must have a strong economic plan. You just can't go to war. You've got to create economic deterrence. And also ask Pakistan to reduce its mission size to maybe just the head of mission and 2 diplomats. Point number 5 is take the Sino-Pakistan, the China-Pakistan nexus across to the world, big campaign against it, and tell the world how it is damaging India's interests. Take it to the UN, take it to the US, take it to the UK, take it wherever aggressive diplomacy takes you. Mr. Mansi.
Well, I frankly think that we are a bit obsessive with Pakistan. My own recommendation would be to downgrade Pakistan as a threat to India and upgrade China as a bigger threat.
Right.
That's what is emerging. So let's give Pakistan its due. It's a threat. Terrorism is the big issue here, and let's deal with that firmly. Now, acting tough with Pakistan, I don't quite know what it means. A lot of people say surgical strikes, this, that, and the other.
Yeah, so we've talked about covert ability.
But there's a limit to that, because remember, Pakistan has nuclear weapons,
right,
has probably got more nuclear weapons than India has, is developing tactical nuclear weapons. So that is a constraint on how tough you can get with Pakistan.
Right.
So toughness with Pakistan will come through international action, not through bilateral threats.
Okay.
China, that is the bigger threat.
Yes.
And it's time to deal with China and Pakistan as hyphenated threats.
Yes, which is
a single block of threat to India.
Absolutely. So our next point will deal with China. I want to come to Mr. Karju.
Pakistan is a threat. China may be a superior threat, but let us not underestimate Pakistan's threat. We have simply failed in finding an answer to Pakistan's cross-border terrorism and much more against India.
So we've given a few points. Are these good enough?
Yes. I do believe we've got to craft out a mechanism which is comprehensive, which will include some of these points. We need, by covert action, let's face it, we don't mean that you launch terrorist stuff against Pakistan. That's not needed.
Absolutely.
They are doing it enough injury to themselves. But we need to show that we mean business and erode Pakistan's national capacity.
A specific example to explain that.
For example, why don't we take them on trade? Pakistan is crucially dependent on only a very limited number of commodities
right,
for its exports.
Right.
We just don't seem to be taking them on. On the other hand, for example,
India's
textiles.
cotton, for instance, they need India's cotton for the textile industry.
Textiles,
Yes.
for example.
Yes.
The UPA government, to my great dismay, gave when it came to the EU asked after the Pakistani floods of 2010
Right.
a special dispensation
Right.
for Pakistani exports of textiles
Right.
to the EU. After holding out, we succumbed.
So you're saying we just need to toughen up on this?
We need to toughen up
Right.
and be more realistic on this.
Right.
We simply seem to be living in an airy-fairy land, hoping that one
Always-
day these naughty boys will change. They never will.
Let me go to Commodore Bhaskar there, and then I'll come to Mr. Shukla.
I think first of all, Raghav, apropos both Pakistan and China, we need to evolve a very comprehensive and an effective policy, not just for the next government, but for the next 20 to 30 years. And that is something which has eluded us for a variety of reasons.
So what are the elements of
Both
that?
with Pakistan, the elements are that, for instance, specific to Pakistan,
Yes.
to be able to make an informed assessment
Right.
about what kind of a threat/challenge it poses to us. And here I think we have not been able to come up with the appropriate template for the political leadership. Now with Pakistan, we have a range of security related issues. Mumbai 2008 is one example.
Yes.
We have a proxy war. We have the kind of ideological fervor that makes its way into India. And policy decisions range, I would say, from trade and other matters that Vivek Karju referred to.
Yes.
We also have hardcore military issues like Siachen.
Yes.
And on the other end, you have people-to-people contact and a constituency that says we must engage in cricket. You know, you have a wide range of such issues. We need a comprehensive policy, and I want to go back to what Mr. Mansingh said. The nexus between China and Pakistan,
Yes.
it needs to be identified, it needs to be addressed in a very innovative way, where I believe foreign policy
Yes.
is going to play a very important role.
Okay.
And that is where I think India needs to go back to some of the basic tenets of what you might call as the Chanakya Niti, the Chanakyan principles.
Yeah, so
here I think, Raghav, I'd like to disagree slightly with you and say
Yes.
the UN is not a forum where India should be knocking, because China and the United States have in the past acted in a manner that is adversarial to India's abiding interest.
Right.
So putting any faith in the UN Security Council, to my mind, would be misplaced.
Okay, so let
you
me come
need
to
your
Mr. Shukla.
own comprehensive national power.
Okay, so let me come to Mr. Shukla.
Right. My starting point is that, the fundamental flaw in our policy towards Pakistan since Indira ji passed away has been that if you treat Pakistan as a friend, it will become a friend. Now, we have 30 years of experience to say that's not true.
So our points
And
are not going by that.
Your points, I'm endorsing your points.
Yes.
And the other thing that I would add to this
Yes.
is that there is an Afghan factor
Yes.
that's going to become very important
Right.
come the end of this year.
Yes.
And we need to prepare for it, which we have not been doing.
Yes.
And the allies are obvious, or well, allies isn't a good word, but the partners in this strategy are pretty obvious.
Yes.
But we have not really worked with them, and we need to rectify that.
And I think
Now,
we're going to come, when we
as
talk
far
about
as-
America,
yeah,
we'll
I
talk
know.
about
Now,
that.
as far as the nexus is concerned, one of the issues that I have been pushing very hard, but the government has to take it up, is this Chashma 3 and 4 nuclear cooperation and the Karachi nuclear power plant. They are clear violations of China's commitment under the NSG.
Absolutely.
Now, if we don't agitate on this, the fact is our partners tell us, if you are not concerned, why do you want us to fight your battles for you?
It's that whole point
And
about
this-
expose China-Pakistan link.
It's the mindset. It's the mindset more than anything else.
We need to get aggressive
You're
as
going to
well.
ask someone else to fight your battles for
Right,
you
right.
without fighting yourself.
Right.
At least start the fight.
Right. Okay. So, if a quick poll with the audience: how many of you would be in favor of getting far more coercive in our diplomacy, not military coercive,
Yeah.
but diplomatically coercive with Pakistan? How many of you would say that we should do that? So now this gets almost a ringing 100% endorsement from the audience. Right time to come to China then. Points number 6, 7, and 8 of our agenda for the Prime Minister really do deal with China. We are saying, of course, expose the Pakistan-China link. We are also saying, get far more aggressive about Tibet. You've got to use that as almost a bargaining chip with China when you talk to China. 7, and this one is really important. China has created a state-of-the-art infrastructure, road infrastructure, other infrastructure on its side of the border. We are dismally behind. We've got to pick this up and invest very heavily in the roads along the China-India border. We are saying if you have to do it, end the responsibility or the monopoly of the Border Roads Organization, get private capital involved if you have to. And number 8, you know, your enemy's enemy is your friend. So if China has a problem with other East Asian countries like Vietnam, go in and do defense pacts with Vietnam, get a closer defense alliance going with Japan. So these are the 3 or 4 points that we have on China. Let me begin with Mr. Shukla.
Right. I completely endorse the point about Tibet. In fact, I can tell you that we at VIF, and I personally, and Lalit also has a chapter in that book, we brought out a book on Tibet, bringing out all the history, the current situation.
So how can we use it? How can we use that in international diplomacy?
Look, today,
what does the next Prime Minister do?
There are 3 issues which we can use to internationalize the Tibet question.
Yes.
1, human rights.
Yes.
2, water. The water diversion and the water damming are issues of concern to many of our Asian neighbors.
Right.
And the third, very important, there's a UN GA resolution of 1961 calling for self-determination for Tibet.
So now, we should get that.
Now people will say,
get that going.
Yeah, exactly. People will say, you know, GA isn't the same as SC, true.
Right.
But remember, Israel was created by a GA vote, not by a Security Council vote.
Right.
So there's a lot of teeth that we have, which we can use.
Which we need to use. Mr. Kachru, there are also points number 7 and 8.
As a preface, let me say that we must liberate our China policy from our Chinese experts. They have, over the last half a century, held us to a diffident policy with China.
Right.
Now, I'm not suggesting adventurism, but a certain confidence, treating them like any other normal state, and a state with which we have major difficulties which will continue.
Right. Mr. Mansi.
Well, there are 2 aspects to this, bilateral ties with China and what we should do with our other neighbors. Now, let me talk about Tibet.
Yes.
The reason why the government of India has been soft on Tibet is because we assume that in 1956 we abandoned our traditional stand on Tibet and recognized Chinese sovereignty over Tibet. It is not a fact. What we did recognize was Tibet as an autonomous region of China.
Right.
And we can question that. Has China treated Tibet as an autonomous region?
Right.
Number 2, people say if you talk about Tibet, you are interfering in other countries' affairs. I say, when did India not express concern about violation of human rights and fundamental rights?
Right. So we have to step up on that.
We promoted the cause of democracy in Fiji. We took up the Tamil cause in Sri Lanka. We talk about apartheid in South Africa. Why shouldn't we talk about the Tibetans?
It's that whole diffidence with China.
Absolutely. Now, therefore, we must bring Tibet back, and we must wholeheartedly support the Tibetan cause, and not be so diffident as Vivek said about the having relations with Vietnam and so on. 100%. This is what Kautilya taught us in the 4th century BC.
Right.
If the Vietnamese, the Indonesians, the Philippines are threatened by China, they are our natural allies.
Reach out to them.
The Americans, the Australians, the Koreans and the Japanese are our natural partners. We should reach out to them and have a more effective...
I just wanted to say one thing, that, you know, as we move on the Tibet question, we shouldn't be facing the kind of situation which the West is today facing over Ukraine, of not being prepared. Because let's face it, the response from China is going to be a ferocious one, and we must be militarily ready to face up to the worst that they can do.
Your foreign policy will have no
because they will do their worst, number 1.
Yes.
Number 2, I want to make one point which is not mentioned here. Perhaps you covered it somewhere else.
Yes.
The Chinese economy. You know, somehow we've built up this image of a China that's unstoppable and going to become... It's not true.
It's currently very weak and it's weakening by the day.
Fundamentals are extremely weak.
Absolutely. Dheeraj.
Yeah, I think this is one country in the world that that other nations are scared of is China, much more than the United States now, because of the opacity of the system, because of its unspoken ambition of global superiority.
And its blistering growth over the last 20 years.
And its phenomenal growth. So, I mean, to give them credit, they've done a lot of good, but there's a lot of mystery surrounding China, which is what people fear. So we have plenty of allies, as has been said, from the United States to Japan to Vietnam, which we should engage with. But domestically, the point which wasn't taken up so seriously was the investment on border roads. I think we really critically need to upgrade our physical infrastructure on the borders with China, because if there is anything, if we take up Tibet, if there is a response, if there are incursions, we need to be prepared on our side. So up the defense spending, which is our point number one. But secondly, you've got to get the equipment ready and up onto the borders. And if you have no roads, it's going to be extremely difficult.
So this has to be really priority number 1 or 2 when we address this. So, Prime Minister, you've got all these points really coming at you. We'll take a short break. You go to our website, thinkindia.in.com, give your suggestions, and come right back. Welcome back to Change India, an agenda for the next Prime Minister. We've already done about 8 points covering Pakistan, China, covering the structure of our foreign policy apparatus. Point number 9, and this one's really the big one, the US. We believe that the 21st century, this will be one of the vital relationships that India will have to craft and work on. We are saying there are naturally aligned interests here. We should build on those. We are talking about Afghanistan, Pakistan region. We're talking about Iran, how India can play a role there. We're also talking about moving, it'll take a while, but moving towards a free trade pact, building a bilateral investment treaty. There is a lot with the US which we can work towards a natural strategic alliance. I know the Indian foreign policy establishment or the Indian political establishment doesn't like the phrase strategic interests, but there is perhaps this natural confluence. Mr. Mansi.
I think we are at a stage where we have the worst possible time in our bilateral relationship since 1998, when the nuclear test took place and the Americans imposed sanctions on us. By that time, we were not strategic partners. We are strategic partners.
We still
today.
shy away from saying we are strategic partners.
Pardon?
We still shy away from saying that. We always look for corollary phrases.
No, but why don't
closest partners, good friends.
Why do we shy away from saying we're strategic partners?
Yes.
If you need the US and the US needs you, there's a mutuality and we must accept it.
Absolutely.
Now, unfortunately, the Devyani episode, to my mind, is one of the biggest instances of bilateral stupidity. That a wage dispute can cause a bilateral strategic partnership to crumble in such a way amazes me.
Yes.
But the
it
fact
just shows you the fragility of the relationship as
exactly.
well.
So there is, when we talk about trust deficit,
Yes.
we have a huge trust deficit with the United States.
Right.
But what I want our government to understand is, yes, we must put that behind us, have a suitable agreement with the Americans on how to face similar things in the future.
Yes.
But for heaven's sake, we have 23 high-level dialogues with the United States.
Yes.
These are important areas of cooperation. Let's try to get back as soon as possible.
Let's get energy into that.
Absolutely.
Let's get energy into that. Mr. Kajit, also the Afghanistan issue here.
We need a cooperative relationship with the Americans.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that our interests coincide in every area.
Of course
there are areas where they diverge.
Where we
and
have
I
differences.
believe in the AFPAC region, as the Americans now call it,
Yes.
our interests don't necessarily coincide.
Right.
The Americans want to maintain a certain balance here.
Right.
In the immediate future, they need to extricate themselves out of the Afghanistan quagmire.
Right.
And for that, they need the Pakistanis more than they need us.
But we need to be players as well.
No, look, the world today recognizes, unlike in the 1990s, that India is a player.
Right.
That is the experience that I had in the 90s when they didn't want you to intervene. Today, everyone accepts that India has a natural interest in this, in Afghanistan, and no one denies that.
So how should we play our cards in a sense there?
I think we need to play our cards by becoming an independent actor in Afghanistan. It will be suicidal for our interests, not only in Afghanistan but in the region.
Yes.
If we are perceived as younger brothers of the Americans. No, we shouldn't.
That would be suicidal
there are
for
areas,
India.
but there are areas, Raghav, where our interests coincide, like stabilization of Afghanistan.
Exactly.
Like strengthening Afghan Central Authority.
Yes.
Like improving Afghanistan's economy. Like trying to wean it away from narcotics.
Right.
These are the areas where we need to work with the Americans on a basis of equality.
Right.
But we need to be a little careful of the American embrace.
No, absolutely. I mean, Mr. Shukla.
Look, this is one relationship where we really need to break with the Nehruvian past, non-alignment. I think it's been a burden on our minds ever since the Cold War ended, and yet it continues to dominate our thinking.
Yes.
And we've got to shed it, number one. The starting point is that nobody is going to fight your battles for you.
Of course.
You prepare reports about what they did in Mumbai in 2008. That's not the way the real world works.
I think that's a given. So.
You've got to show that you can stand on your own feet.
Yes.
Now,
particularly the Americans. The Americans like a tough negotiator.
They respect strength.
Yes.
The whole world does, America particularly, as you rightly say. Now, there are two areas where I think we have been unnecessarily diffident.
Yes.
Precisely because of this non-alignment overhang.
Yes.
What are they? One, the US rebalance to Asia. The number of US VIPs who came here, including Vice President Biden, pitching for us to lend a hand in the strategy.
To step up and play along.
To step up and play along
Yes.
in a strategy which was in our interest.
Exactly.
And we are hanging back.
Yes.
The similar approach is the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is the economic arm of this. Finally, I'll just to be brief, let us acknowledge that there are some administrations that are well disposed towards India, others are not, and we have to accept that this is a hiccup in the Obama second term. Things will not move very fast here. We have to accept
We
that.
have to accept.
But prepare for the bigger
Sure. So I want to
days.
come to the audience. Any quick questions anybody has?
With India as a rising power being encouraged to play a greater role in the Asia Pacific, how do you think that may impact upon Sino-Indian relations in the South Asian neighborhood?
I would want to ask, we've had a lot of policies framed in the last 10 years. So why shouldn't it be the case that we should focus more on implementing those policies on ground rather than drafting more of them?
Sure. Execution is the big thing. Yes. Last question. Yes.
Regional parties and coalition partners be allowed to dictate foreign policy?
Okay. Uday, if you've heard some of these questions, can you quickly give us an overview? We're running out of time because we have to go to the next point.
The very quick overview, Raghav, is that India's challenge, and this relates to many of the questions asked, how do you engage with the United States on one hand and with China on the other, and ensure that India's national interest, India's security interests, and the idea of India are appropriately both nurtured and protected. And for this, my last point, if I may, is that we need to have much greater clarity about engaging with the United States, and the political diffidence that we saw in UPA 2, particularly after 2008, when there was a visible improvement in India-US, is something that has to be reviewed and redressed.
Yes. So, Raghav? Very shortly we'll have change of administration in both countries. So hopefully that will help. Yes, Dheeraj.
Very quickly, one of the other points is that we traditionally look at foreign policy as a state-to-state affair.
Yes.
But India has a huge and vibrant private sector. So I think with the United States also, this relationship will be taken forward by private sector interests, business interests on both sides.
Right.
And even with neighboring countries, I think we need to leverage up, because if the government is short of resources, which it is in India, we have a fiscal crisis, then we must use the private sector to go out into the neighborhood and extend India's influence.
Yes. I have literally 1 minute left, and I've got the last point, and that's on using a carrot and stick approach to Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives. For instance, the Maldives had a virtual coup. Could we have flown a sortie close to Maldives just to assert that we are here, listen to us? I know Mr. Mansingh is not agreeing with such a muscular policy. Mr. Kajju.
Bhai bin hot na preet.
And what is that?
There is no affection without a bit of coercion.
So, thoda coercion, some coercion you're saying is. So you resolve it for us. We have diametrically opposite points of view.
No, well, if you have the capability, of course you must be willing to coerce.
Yes.
My suspicion, my fear actually, is that we don't have that capability today. We've allowed it to atrophy.
Right.
After all, we did it in 1988, and now we're not able to.
Yes. So you're saying first build that muscularity before you start going.
This is the basic.
Yes, Mr. Mansingh.
Raghav, if we have to threaten Nepal or Maldives with our military strength,
yes,
I think our foreign policy is a failure.
No,
not at all.
It's not military
Not at all.
strength. It is that we will look after our interests and we will not allow you to play with our security interests in particular.
Right. So
doesn't mean we won't be generous with
We
them.
should define what is coercion.
Yes. No, we are certainly not talking about, getting in and launching a war or even...
You talk about sending a sortie.
We are saying, these, well, maybe not that, maybe that's an extreme example. But Dheeraj, last point to you, so you can sum it up for us. We're also talking about leveraging the strength of our private sector.
Exactly.
For instance, Sri Lanka needed to build a port. If the government of India couldn't build a port, several Indian companies could go on and build that port.
And I think we've completely failed at our foreign policy has failed to leverage the strength of the private sector in particular over the last 10, well, I mean till 1991, 92 we didn't really have a private sector strong enough.
I think.
But I think we need much more closer interaction between private sector and our foreign policy establishment. I think economic diplomacy should be one of the key emphasis going forward. And I think with all the neighbors, I mean, this is the carrot which is going to work. Forget the stick. This is the way we can make more friends.
Yeah, my
put investment in, put money in, create jobs in the neighboring countries.
My favorite example. Yes, sir.
Only one caveat here. I hope the private sector abroad in infrastructure will be more efficient than it is here. That is the only caveat.
Absolutely. But the idea of using India's private capital.
Yes, of course, we need to use
China,
all instruments that we have, and the private sector is a major instrument.
Absolutely. My favorite example there is China does a $5 billion investment in Africa and gets written about all over the world. An Indian company goes and does a $10 billion acquisition in Africa. Nobody applauds it at home. We need to change that. Mr. Prime Minister, or Madam Prime Minister, we've got these 10 points for you. You'll take office in June. This is the last of our show. We will be there to present it to you. So with this we come to the end of our series. For the last 3 months you've been with us. We have compiled 14 strategic policy areas. In each policy area we've got 10 action points, so 140 action points which we will compile, present to the next Prime Minister. Mr. Prime Minister or Madam Prime Minister, when on the 16th of May 2014 you are elected to office, we hope that you will be able to pick some of these ideas up. As you've seen, they are not very difficult to implement. All they need is a little bit of leadership, which we are sure you will have. And we believe that if you do this, we can change India. And before we go, let's take a look at the anthem of Change India.
वो सुबह कभी तो आएगी, वो सुबह कभी तो आएगी, इन काली सदियों के सर से जब रात का आंचल ढलकेगा, जब दुख के बादल पिघलेंगे, जब सुख का सागर छलकेगा, जब अंबर झूम के नाचेगा, जब धरती नगमे गाएगी, वो सुबह कभी तो आएगी, वो सुबह